All right, folks, now that we're all at the front table here and you guys are all in your seats, we'll call to order our regular meeting of council for Monday, February 26th, 7:03 by my iPad. My apologies, folks. Looking for approval of our agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We are acknowledging that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people this evening as we move forward on our agenda. First item up is public participation. Members of the public, please step forward. Name, address, and all the good stuff.
Mayor and Council, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Les Biola. I am the treasurer for the West Shore Parks and Recreation Society. Also with us tonight is our chairman, Mr. Ed Watson, and also in the audience is one of Colwood's representatives, Al Hood. I draw your attention to page 261, 262 of your package. You received, or you had, a presentation from our acting CEO last week, Sandy Clark. I apologize. Mr. Watson was languishing in 25 degrees below zero in Saskatoon, and I was languishing in 25 degrees above zero in Cuba. So we were not able to be here last week. Yeah. I've been a director for the West Shore Parks for this is my 13th year. And the amount of trials and tribulations that we've gone through is absolutely staggering. And I just want you to know that in my 13 years, I actually feel like we're at a breakthrough point. We're actually going to turn the corner and have unanimous consent on a number of issues coming out of the Rec Commission. And we've struggled mightily on this budget that you have before you for approval. And I would really encourage you to ride the storm with us for one more year while we figure this out. I believe that we're going to come out with a new governance structure this year. I believe that we're going to come out with a very strong and renewed enthusiasm at the West Shore Parks and Rec Center. The staff down there have done an absolutely amazing job of holding it together, and I want to give them every bit of ammunition that I can to get us through this year, and so that we can turn around and give you a 10-year, possibly a 25-year operating window coming next year. So tonight I come before you and ask for your support for the budget that's before you, and I'm here, and I don't know if it's appropriate, Madam Mayor, if questions, but we're here if you need to ask us any questions. And thank you for your time, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for coming and sharing that. Next, Desiree.
Hi, Desiree Bond, 546 Delora Drive. And as you probably know, I'm back about the park and ride. One thing that on the 13th of February, we had a meeting, and the land redesignation was described solely and only as housekeeping. So there was no intention, it was just housekeeping. We weren't planning on doing anything with the land immediately. And I was really disappointed that nobody on council mentioned that council had already asked the Advisory Planning Commission to look at changing the zoning. So I think that piece of information should have been shared at the time when you were describing it, the land redesignation as only housekeeping, because I think people would have liked to have known that you were already looking to rezone that property, and you're going to be talking about that tonight, and as I understand, they're not recommending it. I think what you're hearing from the public is we don't want to sell the land the park and ride's on. I think that West Shore Parks and Rec spoke up, or people who use that facility as an overflow parking for things that happen there, and they also spoke up saying they didn't want that land sold. And now you've got the Planning Advisory Commission suggesting that you don't sell the land. And I think that it's clear that, you know, I'm hoping that council will hear all those voices telling you that we're really against it. And I'm very disappointed, actually, that the housekeeping that was described was really not housekeeping if you were going to put it to a rezoning right away, and that wasn't brought up. That was very disappointing to hear on Facebook, but thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Judith Collington, 3338 A Smink. So I'm actually standing up to talk about item 731, which is the urban forest bylaw piece. But just if I may, a quick observation. I did attend the advisory planning committee meeting the other day, and I would say that my observation was that there was support for the wellness centre as long as the park and ride issue is addressed. And really what the APC was saying is we're not ready to move forward with rezoning at this point in time. There are too many unanswered questions. And so I would encourage you not to see this as a kind of, completely put that idea aside. It's a good idea, but deal with the issues before being ready to move forward with rezoning. Just quickly on the urban forest bylaw piece, this was done because the Urban Forest Task Force recommended or recognized that there's a real challenge happening with the interim bylaw, and that is that there are folks coming to the front desk and they're finding it very difficult, very expensive to take down hazard trees. And so in the interests of safety, human safety and safety of property, what the task force recommended was that there be an interim piece to the bylaw. So asking council to consider a change that would be in the very short term, that would be until the Urban Forest Task Force has finished its work and comes forward with its recommendations for an adjusted bylaw. But basically one that allows people to much more simply take down a hazard tree that is demonstrated to be a hazard. So the way that that's being done, and I'm sure staff will talk about this, is it's being done by recognizing a hazard tree as an exemption. So basically saying as long as it can be proven to the satisfaction of staff and maybe not even needing arborist report, if somebody comes in with a picture of a tree that is very obviously dead and hanging over a house, that it can be fairly simply removed. So that would mean that a hazard tree could be removed, no permit, no fee, no replacement trees. Again, it's not necessarily where we would go in the longer term, but in the short term, it provides a way of making sure, keeping people safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to address 7.2.1. A few years ago, during what we might call the Great Sewage Treatment Crisis of this area, there was a proposal to develop that site with at that time it was with a sewage treatment plant in the bottom and parking to replace the parking ride, and then multi-story commercial and residential. And that went to a public meeting. And if I've got my numbers right, 73% of the people who attended the public meeting or commented afterwards supported that proposal. So it seems fairly clear that there's strong support for something to be built there. And I certainly would strongly support that, because I think it's a really, really key site in the development of the downtown. And because it's so important, that's why I'm so concerned about it. At the APC meeting, they said the recommendation was to not move it forward. Now that's not erase it, cancel it. It's not move forward. They didn't add at this time simply because it wasn't one of the options in front of them, I think. But in my opinion, they might as well have added at this time. And certainly 2 or 3 of them spoke eloquently of needing more information. And I don't want to put words in their mouths, but they had details of what sort of information they wanted. And it's a shame there isn't a video of that meeting so that we could all, or anybody who wasn't there, could see what was said in detail, because some of the detail was interesting. my impression was that they want more information, more certainty about things, and that it didn't come with the normal information that a proposal comes with for rezoning. And I think I can understand why. The city is rezoning it. The city owns the property. The city has total control. So why do you need to explain to yourselves what it is that you're going to eventually decide on rezoning? And I think maybe the missing part here is that although council makes all the decisions on rezoning in the end, the public is asked for their opinion, and they don't know how to give their opinion, and they don't have enough information. They don't know what the building will look like, and I can't recall a case where council has rezoned somebody else's land when they didn't know, they had no clue what kind of building was going to be built there. And sometimes rezonings actually state, that it shall be built in general accordance with the proposal that was presented at the time of rezoning. Not always, but that something along of that ilk has happened. Now, why there was so much support for the sewage treatment version? Who knows? Who knows how many of those people were there because they wanted sewage treatment in Colwood, and how many were there because they supported the development. But one big difference was part of that proposal was to keep the park and ride underneath the proposed development. And I figured that would cost about $2 million, which is a pretty big expense. But how are we going to develop a park and ride somewhere else, which is what has been promised? Wouldn't that land developed without a structure cost about the same anyway? And therefore, why not spend the $2 million keeping the park and ride where it is and everybody's happy? We still get the advantage of all the tax revenue from the development. But if somebody else is paying for the park and ride, if it goes somewhere else, please let us know that. And then perhaps the support might be a slightly different color. Thank you.
Anybody else? Last and final time? Then we shall get on with things. Next up on the agenda is Mayor's message. Not really a lot to report in over the last couple of weeks. Wounded Warriors finished up their run in Victoria on Sunday down at the legislature, and I think didn't hear the final number on fundraising, but I think it's going on for a few more days yet in there. But they had gotten well into their hopes of getting near to 100,000. I think last I heard was 56. So, and they were still in Nanaimo. So I'm hoping that they were able to pick up more monies for the awareness of PTSD for our frontline workers, not only our military folks that have come back from awful situations overseas, but also for our first responders, our firefighters, our police, our ambulance, and others that are run the front line on our behalf. Anybody from council? Councillor Nault?
Yes, just a quick word on the Urban Forest Committee. As you see, there's a resolution before council tonight. We'll deal with that when it comes up. I want to point out on the 15th of February, we held a meeting, and we had exactly 2 members of the public in attendance. And on the 22nd, we held another meeting, and there were no members of the public in attendance. So after a great deal of public interest in this bylaw, either we're doing an absolutely perfect job or they're not interested anymore. I would encourage the public to come out and listen and put their 2 cents worth in. Our next meeting will be 1st of March at 7 p.m. City Hall.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll move on. Adoption of 1 set of minutes for this evening from February 13th.
Move adoption.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Receipt on 3 sets of minutes for this evening. Heritage Commission minutes from November 8th, Committee of the Whole from January 15th, and Committee of the Whole from February 5th.
Move receipt.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. I do apologize for two members of council that are not here this evening. Councillor Logan and Councillor Trace are both away for this evening. Item 5.1 is a presentation from Inspector Chomyn, RCMP, quarterly report. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having the time to present the quarterly report. My purpose tonight is I'm here to answer any questions on the quarterly report. I'll go over and touch on a couple of high points from the report itself, and then have an opportunity to solicit some of your input regarding our annual performance plan and strategic planning moving into the current year. As of April 1st, we'll begin a new fiscal year in the RCMP, and we will have a new annual performance plan. So I'll be asking you tonight if you have any priorities that you'd like the West Shore Detachment to address. So dealing with the quarterly report, and my apologies, my understanding is the statistics for the West Shore overall were left out of the original release of the quarterly report to you, and they should have come along as a separate attachment. So hopefully you have those in front of you. But dealing with the statistics now for Colwood specifically, your calls for service are down 2% for year to date. However, as a West Shore Detachment overall, we're up 4% for calls for service. Our residential break and enters generally in the West Shore are down, as are theft from vehicles, which are property crime related offenses. However, saying that, our business break and enters are up. Our other B&Es, which would be sheds and outbuildings, those types of things are up, and we're significantly up in our theft of vehicles. And some of that is because we know that we have some individuals that are targeting those specifically, and we're strategizing and having some of our plainclothes units work specifically on targeting those individuals who we know are actively stealing vehicles. So we are aware of that, and we are working towards that. Other things to touch base on are our current priorities. So one of our priorities, and they're in no particular order, are prevent and reduce the threat and impact of serious and organized crime. So a lot of that is around intelligence gathering and monitoring, and specifically monitoring organized crime and outlaw and motorcycle gangs. As you're aware that we do have a clubhouse that's presented itself now on Spencer Road in Langford. So we've been strategizing and gathering a significant amount of intelligence. We've been working with our municipal partners as well as our federal agencies that are dealing with organized crime to share that information. Our plainclothes people are going to the general meetings, and we've also tasked some of our traffic units to really, while they're on the road, take a look at what's going on in that clubhouse and as far as any illegal activity and traffic offenses that are happening. Along with that, then we have enhanced road safety and distracted driving, which is another priority. We have a 3-person traffic unit. They are now fully up to speed. We've spent a lot of time in the beginning of the year training and getting their skills set up because they came from the general duty background, and there's a lot of specialized training that was involved with traffic specifically. So I suppose we've topped that hill now where they're in a position that they have the training behind them. We're seeing more counterattacks, and they were also tasked, and they work very heavily on the organized crime aspect within and working with our plainclothes unit. And they actually made quite an impact in that area and gathered a significant amount of intelligence, so much so that some of the federal agencies have been using them as a resource for what has been happening on the South Island. Enhance the safety and health of Aboriginal community. Our First Nations community policing assigned member was on the Tour de Rock, and he was cycling from the Port Hardy down to the south of the island and spent basically September doing that. Also has participated in a number of activities on the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nation and dealing a lot with the youth in those areas. And then our reduced property crime. One of our priorities was to reduce our residential break and enters, which we've done, but unfortunately our business break and enters and our theft of vehicles are up. So again, we're actively working on those, including placing the bait car out there and trying to catch the individuals. Community engagement through programs in education and prevention, and we have a community policing section that's heavily involved in that. They're dealing with a number of community events. They also participate and they teach the DARE program in the local schools. I can also add that as far as dealing with some of our property offenders is we have what's called the Prolific Offender Management Program, and those are where we have a core group of individuals who do the bulk of our crimes. So a very small number of individuals, and in the case of the West Shore, there are 6 people that have been designated as prolific offenders, and they will do the vast majority of our repeat and chronic offenses. And 4 of those individuals have been taken and placed into custody. 2 of them are continue to be targeted and monitored with the goal essentially as they stop crime or they get them back into custody. But those can generate a significant amount of work for us because one individual, one small group of individuals going out in any particular night can create over a dozen files for us in dealing with break-and enters or theft from vehicles. And finally, dealing with the human resource side, just to bring to your attention and awareness is that the G7 will have an impact on the West Shore detachment. As the island specifically is being tasked, right now they brought the number down, is that the island will be asked to send 60 members back to Quebec for the G7. Right now, it looks, the advice or the information that I am receiving is that the TAC troop members are the ones who are going to be tapped on the shoulder to go back to Quebec. West Shore Detachment has 6 people who are assigned to the TAC team. So whether all 6 will go, we know some won't be available for their own personal reasons, but we're anticipating that we will probably see upwards of 5 members from the West Shore Detachment going back to Quebec. They'll also be touching up some members from the emergency response team, some of the dog unit members, and then VIP trained members. So in general, we're probably looking at West Shore giving up 5 people for that period of time, and they can't tell us yet how long that period will be. There is a leave restriction in place in the RCMP right now, so for the beginning of May till the beginning of June, to make sure that we do have the resources available to do that. From a financial point of view, any members that do get sent back to Quebec, the communities or municipalities won't pay their salary dollars. That will be going to the federal dollars, but what the caveat on that is they do not give you they don't backfill those positions. So if we end up in a position where we have to bring somebody in on overtime, that will be a cost to the detachment. So hence why they impose the leave restriction, try to maximize the coverage. We're also being given a heads up is that there could be another busy fire season. So all of that timing-wise is going to be fairly similar, where we're seeing the G7 coming around in June, just at the beginning of the fire season, and we were hit fairly heavily with having to second members to the fire season last year. So we're preparing for it, we're developing our schedules, and we're monitoring our resourcing and our leave patterns on that to make sure that we have roadable resources here. So that, in a quick summary for the quarterly report, and I can answer any questions on the report or anything else on policing. And then if you have time, I can engage with your priorities.
Good, thank you. I'll open it to council. Any questions?
Thank you. I actually have several. So can you, the first, when you're talking about the G7, and I completely understand what you're saying about that, but when our officers have to backfill themselves and we're paying overtime on that, does it basically work out to a break even, really, for us? Because I understand we're not paying for those 5 officers while they're away, but so we have that extra money, but then we're paying overtime. So is it basically neutral?
Ideal, and unless we get caught with a flu, for example, going through the office, we really should not be pulling in too many people on overtime. And then it looks at where is that member being assigned to. So it might be that it's a because we have the various communities. If it's a Langford member, for example, that's gone and we have to backfill a Langford position, the billing would go back to Langford. If it was a provincial member, it might go back to the provincial component. So whether it would be billed back to Colwood would depend on why we have to backfill it and what's happened. So generally for that period, I'm not expecting that we're going to be calling in overtime just to backfill because we sent people to G7. But if suddenly somebody's broken their leg or gets injured and we're short on the watch and we go below our minimum standards, then we would have to. Okay. And yeah, so reality is you probably would break even in the big scheme of things.
Also, to the Mayor, staying on human resources, in years past, we have not had a full complement of Colwood officers just because we were waiting for people to come out of the academy and that. Reading your notes today, are we completely full then now?
We are not.
We're not.
And that's a bit of a complicated answer and a bit of a sliding scale. So unfortunately, and I say unfortunately from a commander's point of view, is what I was operating on probably about a year and a half or so ago was that with staffing, if I needed a body, they would bring a body in for me, and I would make sure that it's within our budget cap so that no community is going over. The olden way it used to be they'd look at the hard vacancies and soft vacancies. A hard vacancy was when a member was gone, we had nobody filling that spot, and they needed to fill it. A soft vacancy is when somebody's injured or somebody's sick or they're not on duty. Staffing world will say you have a body, they're just not a roadable resource, they're off duty for whatever reason. They've gone back to the hard and soft vacancies. There are some challenges in the RCMP and manning manpower. Right now, we're probably 300 members short in the province. So I'm running up against the wall saying West Shore is actually fairly well staffed right now. We're probably about 90% staffed right now. My vacancies are falling at the NCO level. In addition, last year we had 4 additional bodies that were granted to us by Langford. So part of that is that it's all been approved now through Ottawa, and we're going through Oregon class. My difficulty is going to be to get those bodies transferred here because they were saying West Shore is fairly well off compared to some detachments that are running probably at 60% vacancy rate. So they're trying to balance that. Then the other challenge that I have is when I do get a body, it's a very good likely that I'm going to get a cadet at a depot, which means it's 6 months field training before they're roadable on their own. So short answer to you is we're about 90%.
One final question. Marijuana, and I'm curious about that once it becomes legalized, and I'm specifically thinking about the relationship between the RCMP and the municipality. And is there going to be any additional costs that you foresee that are going to come down to from a municipal standpoint? You requesting additional equipment or anything along those lines? And I guess just around what does that look like for us from a municipal standpoint? July 1st.
And I'm smiling because I just came back from the BC Chiefs of Police meetings last week. We had a presentation on the marijuana, and unfortunately there's a lot of I don't knows and a lot of no answers at this point. So some of those I can't. I'm speculating if I was to answer some of those questions for you because they can't even tell us what all the true legislation is going to be. Right now our understanding is the startup is being pushed back, and we're probably looking at August or September. From a policing world, the big challenges are going to be how are we dealing with impaired drivers and how are we going to be tackling that? Is it going to be through the swab of saliva, which will only tell us that there is presence of THC in the person, but where's the line going to be for an impaired driver? Are we going to be needing additional training, sending additional members for, there's elements within training that we can do for drug recognition experts and sobriety field testing that can happen and capture marijuana or a drug impairment, but that takes significant training. So that's where we will be impacted operationally. Because it's not being clear yet of how all the legislation is going to roll out, really it's going to be speculative. I do know that some of the communities in West Shore are gearing up, saying that we anticipate that there will be a demand on police resources. So we're looking at are we going to need to increase our RCMP complement on it? But I can't tell you what that looks like and give you an honest answer today.
May I just do a quick follow-up? So just as a quick follow-up to that, so and I don't expect you to have the answer, but if you know, that'd be great. Those things that you're talking about, for example, the swabbing and the additional training of the officers to interpret all that, is the federal government taking on any of that financial responsibility, or is the province taking on that, or is that going to get passed down to the municipalities so that we'll receive a requisition from you, from the detachment, for the municipalities to pay for that type of thing?
My hesitation is I have nothing that tells me that the federal government or the province are going to pay for it. The way the training typically works is the course will be put on, but it's a detachment expense to send members to that kind of training if it's off-site, or to bring the trainers on into the detachment.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Day?
Thanks. I just wanted to check in with you. I noticed that our statistics are up both in sex offenses and drug trafficking. Not unexpected. There's quite an underworld out there. And when I chair the Family Court and Youth Justice Committee, we hear a lot about some of the resources that aren't available to youth in the community. And I'm just wondering, is the Mobile Youth Services team still providing good value for service to the West Shore?
I believe so.
Because there has been some recent changes in the staffing of that position. And I know they have done a lot of valuable service to the West Shore in the past, and I haven't seen them as much, so I just don't know if they're just settling in or how things are going. And there's also been quite a few instances of youth being approached by other youth that I've been made aware of within the West Shore, seeking to coerce them into lifestyles that they may not be familiar with, etc. Just wondering if you could comment on whether you think there are enough supports available in the community currently.
comments on it are there enough supports is, I guess, relative. You can always have more supports in everything. Dealing with the youth, for example, going back about 6 months, we saw that we had intelligence, we were gathering information that there was a quasi-youth gang, in essence, was developing in the West Shore area, and there was a lot of, that involved a number of assaults that happened, some robberies that happened, all within the youth circles. We threw a lot of resources at it. We worked very closely with the schools who were gathering a lot of information and working with us. Some of those individuals were apprehended and placed on curfews and conditions, which our members checked pretty regularly after hours. And as of last month, the information I have is that it's all being disbanded, and for lack of a better term, we've really quashed that emergence of that quasi-gang. That's the second time probably in 3 years that we've seen that kind of thing happening. And we do reach out to our community partners and all the different agencies and groups that support us. So yes, they're there. I guess that would be a political decision, and more back to you. Is it, do you have enough resources in that area?
Anyone else? Thank you, Inspector.
Thank you. And did you want to talk about priorities?
About which?
Policing priorities.
Policing priorities.
So if you have my report, if you look at the second page after the cover page, you have our five priorities that we currently are working on. And those are prevent and reduce the threat and impact of serious and organized crime, enhance road safety, distracted driving, enhance relationships with Aboriginal and Indigenous communities, reduce property crime, and community engagement through programs of education and prevention. So as we move forward, we are, in the next week or two, we're going to be sitting down as a detachment based on all those information from the communities and developing another annual performance plan. From that, we will drive our initiatives. What are we going to target as policing? What are we going to ask our members who are on the road to focus on, especially with their proactive time? So of those five, do you see those in line with Colwood, or is there something specific that Colwood would like us to address as the West Shore Detachment?
Councillor Knoll.
Yes, I think the one thing I probably get the most complaints about isn't on your list, and that is excessive speeding. And every single road in Colwood has this problem. We regularly have residents in here complaining about speeding down this road or that road, and I really don't see an awful lot of enforcement taking place. So I would like to see that added as a priority.
Councillor
I don't have anything
Martin?
to add, actually, because that's exactly what I was going to comment as well. I get, and just to reinforce what Councillor Nalda said, I hear more often about people being upset, for example, speeding down Lagoon or Ocean Boulevard, versus the whole distracted driving thing. I don't actually get a lot of people complaining to me that drivers are distracted. It's more that people are flying down Machosen Road and other roads. So it's more of a speed enforcement than a distracted driving that I hear.
Councillor Day?
Thanks. I would echo the concerns about the speeding, but I would also add that for me, it's the dangerous areas that really concern me. There's a number of signs that have been put up with ICBC having identified intersections as being particularly problematic. So when it comes to speeding, of course, that's a problem, but speeding in the trickier areas is even more important. So I'm less concerned where speeding occurs because it's, you know, the end of a long hill or something, as opposed to speeding up to an intersection that's known to be problematic. So that would just be all I'd offer.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Moving into correspondence, we received a letter from the West Shore Arts Council looking for support as they apply to one of their grant programs. So it's fairly straightforward. Councillor Day?
I would move that staff be directed to prepare a letter of support for the West Shore Arts Council to be signed by Mayor Hamilton and submit with their 2018 application to the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch for a community gaming grant, which would be consistent with previous years.
Seconder, please. Any discussion? Councillor.
Thank you. Through the mayor, just to staff, is there any conflicts? Is there anyone else that we provided a support letter to, or is there any reason why this would be viewed as an issue just before we approve it?
Through the mayor, I'm not aware of any conflicts, and it is a similar request to what we've been providing over quite a number of years. So I haven't seen anything at all this year that would be in conflict with this particular request.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Protective Services report from our fire chief. Deputy is going to come in. Disposal of Colwood Fire Department vehicle, car number 50. Chris?
Thank you, Your Worship. As you're aware, the city replaced its fire vehicle, utility vehicle number 50 in 2017. So now we're in receipt of that vehicle, and it's due for retirement. Per the city's purchasing bylaw, staff are required to dispose of that in a certain way, and it hasn't been delegated to dispose of it in any other way. Currently have an offer from the township of Esquimalt to purchase a vehicle for $3,000, and so the city is asking council to consider that request. The fire chief and myself are satisfied that the purchase of that vehicle is at fair market value. In fact, it may be above fair market value. So the principles and intention of the bylaw are being served, as well as there are significant costs to repair it and bring it into good working order. So with that, I'll leave it to council. If you have any questions regarding the specifics of the vehicle, Greg is here to answer that. Otherwise, free for comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, I would just like to move the recommendation that council accept the offer of $3,000 from the township of Esquimalt for the purchase of the 2001 Chevy pickup truck, car number 50.
Discussion? Councillor Martin?
Thank you. So I guess the question I have is, we've disposed of fire vehicles in the past, and normally they have been purchased by like forestry companies, so they're out in the boonies somewhere because they don't actually fit the regulations or needs of a municipal or municipality. So I guess I pause when I see another municipality eagerly buying one of our vehicles, and I question, what is the value that Esquimal's seeing that we're not seeing? Why are they so eager to actually spend $3,000 on this vehicle versus us putting it into an auction and actually having a difficult time trying to get rid of it?
Thank you, through your worship, and Greg might want to comment on this, but I'll say, and perhaps Greg can tell me if I'm right or wrong here, that this vehicle isn't a response vehicle, so it doesn't need to meet the regulations in our NFPA.
That's correct. So when we looked at disposing it, Esquimalt came to us because recently one of their service vehicles became disabled and they're no longer able to function. So without having funding available for a new vehicle, they're looking for something in the short term to carry them through. And that's why they've looked at an opportune time where we're trying to dispose of a service vehicle, and this would meet their short-term needs.
Thank you.
Your Worship, I just want to confirm with the Deputy Chief that they also have the internal resources to repair the vehicle. Is that correct? That's
yes,
why
correct.
It was cost-effective for them
yes,
to purchase.
we did a service check on it, and it's going to be in the tune of $4,000 to have it brought up to roadworthiness, and they are fully aware of that estimate, and they say they do have mechanics on staff that they could take care of that. So the vehicle is being sold as a as-is basis.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Moving on, planning and land use, 7.2.1, recommendation regarding the rezoning application for Ocean Boulevard and Island Highway, the park and ride.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I see that Councillor Logan, Council's liaison with the APC, is not here tonight, so I'll introduce the recommendation. Is that, Madam Mayor, that's okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So, rezoning application number RZ 1704 applied to the property located at Ocean Boulevard and Island Highway is currently the site of a park and ride. The planner, Catherine Lessician, introduced the item at the February 14th Advisory Planning Commission meeting and outlined a proposal to rezone the site to a CD25 comprehensive development zone that would replace the current zoning of P4 park and open space to allow for it to be repurposed for a potential medical service building that would include health services, offices, and retail, and up to 7,500 square meters of floor area. Several residents of Colwood took the opportunity to speak. Generally, there was concerns about a lack of information and then questions about the future decisions around the use of the property. The Advisory Planning Commission also voiced some concerns about what was coming forward and what was to be planned with the property. And they determined that the recommendation of council would be as follows: that the council for the City of Colwood be advised that the Advisory Planning Commission does not support moving forward with rezoning application RZ 17004, located at Ocean Boulevard and Island Highway. Okay. And I'll just introduce the staff report that accompanies the recommendation. As stated on the February 14th, 2018 Advisory Planning Commission meeting, several members of the public and various members of the commission voiced concerns over various aspects of the application to rezone the park and ride site. Many of these concerns surrounded what speakers saw as unanswered questions, and based on this, staff are recommending that the application be withdrawn. Future application and associated supporting submission will be compiled at council's pleasure. Thank you.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with withdrawing the current rezoning application. It was maybe a little bit premature, but I do wholeheartedly agree that the property should be rezoned. It's a very valuable city asset. By it staying as a park and ride, I've seen estimates that we are losing up to $130,000 a year in tax revenue. So basically, the residents of Colwood are subsidizing the park and ride to the tune of $130,000 in missed tax revenue. So having this property developed would be an asset to the City of Colwood. I am worried that by not rezoning it, there's not a whole lot of incentive now for transit to start looking at alternates. So we might be sabotaging the very thing we want. So I would like to see staff move forward and maybe come out with a report for a more general rezoning than the specific CD25. Something to the tune of what the rest of our downtown area is zoned at, and that would leave a wide variety of uses. It would greatly add to the value of the property, and it would also light a fire under transit to continue with relocating their park and ride facility. So I will support the withdrawal for now, but I would like to see council and staff continue to move forward with the public in the loop on getting this property rezoned and developed. Thank you.
Any others? So I need a recommendation, folks.
I will move the recommendation.
Second.
Any further discussion? Just to say that we do have our asset management task before us as well that is being worked on. So there is a requirement to identify these kinds of things and bring them into a management plan. So I'm hoping that at some point staff will be able to come back with a report that better generalizes what we need to do. With that, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is 7.2.2, recommendation on development variance permit DVP 17021 for 3381 Anchorage. Staff?
Thank you, Your Worship. So, staff gave an introduction of the application applying to 3381 Anchorage Avenue. This is an application to vary the rear yard, the rear yard setback, which is currently set at 7.5 meters, and reduce it to 3.5 meters. This would apply to a new lot being created by a subdivision from the parent parcel at 3381 Anchorage Avenue. The owner of the property was there, and his representative spoke briefly to the Advisory Planning Commission, as did several local residents of the area who voiced concerns about views, parking, and the configuration of the setback relative to the proposed subdivision. Staff answered several questions, and there was several comments from the Advisory Planning Commission regarding fire access and several other issues pertaining to the subdivision and not the development variance permit that was before the Commission. In conclusion, the Advisory Planning Commission recommended to Council that development variance permit number DVP 17-021 be authorized for issuance and have the effect of relaxing Section 5.6.06-3 of the Colwood Land Use Bylaw to reduce the rear yard setback requirement from 7.5 to 3.5 meters, subject to the following condition: that the constructed location of the single-family dwelling is substantially compliant with the proposed building envelope drawings and proposed setback drawings attached to the staff report titled Development Variance Permit Number DVP-17-021 in Appendix 1 and Appendix 4 of the report presented to the APC on February 14th, 2018 to the satisfaction of the City of Colwood. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Councillor Day?
Thank you. This particular rezoning is almost exactly in the same orientation as the end of Aloha Avenue, where we have heard of a number of parking and access issues with regard to a fully sized roadway that conforms completely to City of Colwood standards. This does not have that. It has a common driveway access off of the end of the Anchorage Avenue cul-de-sac. And the property overlooks the Esquimalt Lagoon area and the ocean front, and is at the top of the very, very steep hill, hence the setback requirement for the covenant from the top of the cliff edge. I think that it is really important for the City of Colwood to develop in ways that create a livable, welcoming community, which I don't feel that putting 5 homes in the backyard, basically backyard and front yard of one large home is really good value. And even worse, if you were to look this up on the earthquake map, you would find that this is a very dangerous place to be building those 3 homes in the backyard, where we're talking about reducing the setback requirements for. So I think that this development, if it were to proceed as presented, would create a very tight area for parking. And I realize that we would require parking if we had legal suites, but once those homes are built, how they're used is really very poorly regulated by the City of Colwood. We have very little means of knowing how many suites people put in their homes, how many people, how many cars the people who live there will have. And the reality, I think, is that this is going to create a neighborhood that will bring more problems in the future.
Staff first.
Oh, Your Worship, I just wanted to clarify that the application before council is a development variance permit application for the setback. The applicant is making use of existing zoning allocations for density.
Councillor Knoll.
That's exactly what I was going to point out. Under the existing zoning, he could be putting a much taller building in there than the flat roof that he's proposing. So he has the legal right to build now. All we're approving is a setback variance and putting the subject to the building envelope on there that we would not have the control of if he just built without the variance. So we can't go back and review the zoning because it's already there, and so I'm perfectly willing to support the recommendations on that basis.
Okay. Was that a motion? Just to be clear, I just wanted to...
Yes, I would move the recommendations by staff.
And we have a seconder with Councillor Martin, and we'll go back to Councillor Day.
Just a quick question. I'd like to know what year the rezoning was approved.
Your Worship, I don't have that information at my fingertips. However, I'd hazard a guess that this zoning is probably quite old. The R1 zoning that is currently applied to the neighborhood was in place prior to incorporation. Whether this lot was one of the lots that had that initial zoning at incorporation, I've had to guess. I'd say it probably is, but I couldn't be for certain at this time.
Any further questions, comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to 7.2.3, Development Variance Permit DVP 18001 for 468, 474, and 476 Goldstream Avenue.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was expecting Councillor Logan to be here tonight, so sorry.
We're missing that, Councillor.
Yeah. So this application was for yet another development variance permit application. I introduced the item to the APC as a variance for small car parking. So essentially the developers of the landmark development, so that's 3 buildings that form a comprehensive development right at the border with Langford on Goldstream. They want to reduce the size of approximately 11% of the total 247 parking spaces that are planned to be built on site. The applicant was at the meeting to support the application and stated that their decision was based on the design of the building and relative to the space constraints, and that they felt that the number of small cars on the road suggested that this was an appropriate approach for the development. There was a speaker from the neighborhood that spoke for multiple reasons against the development in general, including concerns about the footprint of the buildings and whether there'd be electric vehicle car charging stations included. Members of the Advisory Planning Commission made various comments and questions about the small car parking, and they were responded to by both staff and the applicant. Members confirmed that 11% of the small car spaces, of the 11% of small car spaces subject to the variance, 25% were on the surface and 8% were to be incorporated into the underground parking areas. And that they thought that ideally those numbers be flipped, but in the end did not oppose the variance and recommended that development variance permit number DVP-18-01 for 468, 467 Goldstream Avenue be authorized for issuance, which would have the effect of varying the minimum parking stall dimensions pursuant to section 2.2.02 of the land use bylaw from 5.8 meters in depth to 4.5 meters in depth for not more than 11% of the total number of required parking spaces. Thank you.
Councillor Day?
I would move the recommendation, and my reasoning is simply that most developments that you would visit anywhere in Greater Victoria would have a good percentage of small car parking spaces. 11% doesn't seem like too high a number for accessibility. I think if you're expecting to come and go from the area frequently, you're probably looking at most small cars, and most cars are smaller. There are exceptions, of course, but I think at 11%, that's a reasonable number.
Moving the recommendation. Seconder, please.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Next on the agenda is 7.2.4, revised Capital Regional District Regional Growth Strategy Bylaw 4017, referral for municipal acceptance. Staff?
Thank you, Worship. I think I saved the best for last year. Before you is a revised regional growth strategy that has been referred to the City of Colwood Council for final acceptance or rejection. As Council may recall, this is the second time the RGS has been referred to Colwood, otherwise known as CRD Bylaw number 4017. The first version was rejected by Colwood Council along with 6 other regional municipalities for various reasons. Successful non-binding mediation then led to the creation of the revised regional growth strategy, which is reviewed in the staff report on tonight's agenda. As stated in the report, the sections that Council previously objected to, which were primarily the sections called food systems and some mapping sections, have been amended to address Council's concerns. The balance of the changes were agreed to by Council's appointed representatives in mediation, and staff do not object to the contents, despite minor issues with respect to the RGS's description of development nodes and population projections for Colwood. The changes to the sections of the RGS are summarized in the table prepared by CRD staff attached to the staff report as Appendix 2. Staff did not feel that any of the amendments that came out of successful non-binding mediation in and of themselves represent significant potential for increased costs to Colwood taxpayers. A lot of the changes deal with wording and policy directions that would guide future CRD actions. However, they would require these actions would require future approval of the CRD board. The exception to this are changes to the water servicing section, which now include limits to the extent that water servicing can be extended into the urban containment boundary. These limits include geographical restrictions and limits to the number of dwellings that can be serviced. These changes represent a compromise between the municipalities involved in mediation, and staff feel that they are reasonable and do not, again, represent a major risk to Colwood taxpayers. Excuse me. If Colwood Council or any other member municipality chose to reject the draft RGS, binding arbitration would be used to resolve the disputed sections. If successfully accepted by regional municipalities and the CRD board, the revised RGS will replace the current bylaw adopted in 2003 and conclude almost 10 years of work towards updating the regional growth strategy. That concludes my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councillor Day?
Thank you. I was looking, and I did try to give staff a bit of a heads up for what the changes were with regard to water servicing, as I felt that that was something that could have a long-term impact on the taxpayers of Colwood.
Your Worship, the sections that dealt with water servicing were the most contentious, as you may recall from the mediation section. I didn't hold out much hope that mediation would be successful, and I think it really is a testament to the region that they were able to come together on this issue. And council may recall staff's recommendation on this issue over the years. We've been consistently concerned about the potential for servicing the Wanafeco electoral area and the cost that would come with that through inefficient water systems in areas that do not have a lot of development. The draft RGS, as currently presented, it really restricts the extent to which water can be extended into the Wanafeco electoral area to 3 areas in and around what's currently designated within an urban containment zone in the draft out by Port Renfrew, and then 2 other areas that are defined in both the Appendix 2 table and the draft report. So there's 2 existing communities in the Wanafeco electoral area that they'd like to have the ability to have water systems, and the rest are under a total dwelling cap. So we feel that this was a relatively reasonable approach to meeting the concerns of both the municipalities that were against extending water services into the unincorporated areas and the communities that very much wanted to have water provided. So we feel this is an approach that Colwood can live with.
And just further on the transportation, I did read some in the attachment about extension to transportation hubs. Does that negatively impact Colwood in any way? Some of our most important transit corridors are well beyond what CRD may consider our hub in their map to what we have identified as hubs in our maps.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The staff report, section 3.3 of the staff report on page 2, outlines some issues with a new map called Map 3B Settlement Concept Detail. So the previous draft that was referred to Colwood Council didn't include a hierarchical system of nodes, as it were, so development centers where, as has been stated, things like transit investment would be steered. We see this as it would have been problematic except for the fact that there's wording in the RGS that gives us latitude to invoke our local planning authority to see that Colwood gets developed in a way that Colwood Council sees fit, and we don't have to worry about the regional growth strategy affecting that autonomy based on the wording that's been included and outlined in the staff report. With respect to the transportation infrastructure, we don't feel that given the CRD's role relative to transportation infrastructure, this is a concern at this time. That could change in the future, but the issues that are germane here, we do not feel warrant an objection by Colwood Council.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll just move the staff recommendation.
Seconder then, please. Councillor Knoll?
If we turn to the population, dwelling unit, and employment projections, it's still the same bogus numbers that the CRD has been putting forward since about 2005. The 2011 census didn't support the growth they showed. The 2016 census didn't show the growth they propose, and they're still leaving their 2038 projections exactly as they were. So Colwood's going to be over double its size by 2038. Everybody better get prepared.
Any further comments? And on that one, staff, thanks for being there at the mediation process and participating. I thought my recollection was that they were going to review the 2016 census and try and bring some update to some of this. So, I mean, I'll raise that again with them at the table when we deal with this in an upcoming meeting. But from here, should we be adding to our, I mean, we can approve the recommendation, but just put a second part to, make a statement that we're concerned still with the projection on population?
Madam Mayor, There is a note that staff agreed at mediation, CRD staff, that they would, when time permits, revise the population projections based on up-to-date census data. Colwood staff are already in communication with CRD staff. We've let them know that council has given preliminary approval to a population study here in Colwood. We're working on moving very quickly on that project. As soon as the budget's approved, we're going to be looking at getting a consultant in. And as I said, we're already working with CRD staff to work with them on that. And as soon as that project's done, we'll be providing them with that updated information that'll hopefully help with their review they've stated that they will already undertake.
I guess if that happens after this has all been filed and put out there, though, then it's still just a notation on somebody else's paperwork. It's just that these kinds of things are out there and affect a lot of different decisions and funding things that come forward. I just trying to keep it in perspective for everybody.
One other point I should make, Your Worship, is that the draft Colwood Official Community Plan directly addresses this in our regional context statement. So that statement is meant to show how Colwood will, how our Official Community Plan aligns with the regional growth strategy. That will be submitted to the regional district for their approval. And as I said, it has wording directly stating that we do not feel that the current RGS's projections are accurate, and that's why we're undertaking our own work.
So you don't see a need for us to actually make a statement on behalf of council? Because I would look to my colleagues to adding that as a...
All I can say, Your Worship, is that it's important to be clear with either council's acceptance or rejection at this point because of where we're at.
Yep.
So potentially, I might recommend, just for the sake of being clear with the board, that there'd be two, that you direct staff to submit a letter showing either acceptance or rejection, and then a separate letter regarding the population projections.
So on the recommendation that's before us, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And is there anybody that wants to add or send a letter?
I would further move that staff be directed to communicate to the CRD that council has serious doubts about their population projections and would like to see those addressed.
Well, staff are working on that population report, so I think we can make sure that they get all the information. Yes? A seconder, please.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Finance and Administration, 7.3.1, amendment to Urban Forest Bylaw number 1710, removal of hazardous trees. The recommendation was from our the last task force meeting from February 15th. Councillor Nault.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As part of the review of the Urban Forest Bylaw, the committee has decided that the current method of getting rid of hazardous trees is onerous on property owners, incredibly expensive, incredibly time-consuming, and we will be addressing that in the new bylaw, but in the interim, that new bylaw is still a few months away from coming to council. We would like to propose the following amendment to the current bylaw to basically, it will remove hazardous trees from, it will exempt them from the conditions of the bylaw, and that would be all of the conditions such as permits and arborist report, et cetera, et cetera. The idea is that if the applicant can demonstrate to the city's satisfaction that the tree is indeed hazardous, or provide documentation from a qualified professional that the tree is hazardous, that it should be exempted and removed. So the recommendation is that add as a new subsection in bylaw number 1710 under 6-point exemptions the following. J, any protected tree where the owner can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the city through photograph or other documentation that the tree is hazardous, dead, damaged, diseased, or in health decline beyond expectation of recovery. So for council's information, the protected trees are basically any large tree in the city of Colwood is currently protected, as well as arbutus and Gary oak. So this would effectively say, I've got a dead tree leaning over my house. I come in and demonstrate to the city that it's dead. I can have that taken out without going through the whole permit, without providing replacement trees, without providing a damage deposit to the city, et cetera, et cetera. And this will be hopefully better addressed when the new bylaw comes forward. But for now, I would like to see this benefit the residents of Colwood.
Recommendation, seconder, please. Discussion, Councillor Day.
Thank you. I would just ask staff to speak to their point that they made at the meeting that if the task force removes hazardous trees completely from the bylaw, the city will have no control over the process. So my concern is not the ordinary resident who has one tree that they're concerned about, but perhaps someone who is on a large property they plan to develop, using that as a loophole, if you will.
If I can answer that, they would still have to prove to the city's satisfaction that the trees they remove are indeed hazardous, and you'd have a pretty hard time doing that on a field of healthy trees.
Perhaps staff could explain their comment to me then?
Through the chair, as soon as you put the hazardous trees into exemptions, then all the other aspects of the bylaw are no force in effect. So there will be no permitting process. So the only thing that the city will be involved is looking at a photograph of a hazardous tree, and then it's staff's determination to decide whether that's a hazardous tree, or it's done through a report in writing from an arborist. So the control that the city has is very limited now.
And does that include on development sites?
If they're covered under a development permit, then those requirements are in effect.
I guess I'm curious, they wouldn't be covered by a development permit until one is applied for. So a development site could sit as bare land for quite some time. Staff?
Your Worship, I think the issue that staff are bringing to bear here is the fact that without a tracking mechanism, without oversight in terms of the hazardous trees that have been exempted, it's very difficult to apply the intent of the bylaw, which is to maintain the urban inventory of trees. With respect to a development site, we could run into problems where currently the bylaw allows for someone to cut trees if they're designated within a development permit to be cut. The understanding is that the development permit has other provisions for replacement and compensation of that canopy that's going to be lost, or it's otherwise been decided through a development decision of council that a greenfield site is going to be converted to a development site. If a tree that was marked as being to be retained was then cut down under the guise of it being hazardous without there being a tracking or permitting system, you could have a situation where people take advantage of it in development situations. However, that would be a situation where I think it's probably a more unlikely situation than you would see with someone from a private property that's not involved in development taking advantage of it.
So just to follow up then, for this evening, there was a development variance permit requested. That property had also a rather large mature tree on it. There was no discussion whatsoever of the retention of that tree. Is that tree protected or not protected?
Your Worship, so the property on Anchorage was subject to a development variance permit for environmental sensitivity. part of the conditions of that permit were replacement trees. I can't speak to the specific tree that's being invoked here. However, as I said, there were conditions based on council's design guidelines for development permits that were applied and will be enforced through both the tree bylaw and our environmentally developed permit regulations.
Okay with that? Councillor Martin?
Thank you. Through the mayor to staff, the bylaw or the recommendation seems very subjective to me from a staffing level standpoint, that you guys are looking at a photograph and then making a hazardous decision or not. Is this clear enough from a staffing standpoint that we're not going to get into an issue of subjectivity with owners, where one owner is saying, well, wait a second, you said the tree next door is hazardous, but now that I bring you a picture of the exact same tree, you're telling me this one isn't. So that's my concern, that we're putting staff in a untenable situation where they're having to make sort of a subjective decision versus an objective report coming out of an arborist. So I would just like some clarification from staff if they're comfortable with this motion.
Your Worship, as council's appointed director in terms of, I would be the one that has to make these calls for private property, and I can say I wouldn't be comfortable with this level of discretion. Currently, we're requiring an arborist to make the call. The tree bylaw as it currently stands has provisions for people being able to cut a tree down if it's creating a serious safety hazard, and then coming back and resolving it with council, so that we're not creating immediate life safety issues by requiring hazardous trees to be part of the permitting process. Previous to the tree bylaw being in place, we required an arborist report, or in very rare situations, there'd be a picture of just clearly the tree is hanging over someone's house. It was black and quite dead, and we'd make a call based on that very obvious picture or a trip to the site that it didn't need an arborist report. So I'd be much more comfortable if someone that was qualified to make the decision about a hazardous tree, such as a registered arborist, was giving us that determination.
And that was exactly what the committee was trying to avoid, is having to go through extra loopholes to get a tree on your property that you think is hazardous cut down. I mean, for example, personally, I have about a 50-foot tall, I believe it's a Douglas fir, beside my driveway. It's quite dead. It's leaning into my hydro lines. It's got multiple tops. Any forester would tell you that tree is a hazard, and I'm sure staff would be able to tell by looking at it that it's a hazard. No way a person with a tree in that condition should have to get an arborist's report at hundreds of dollars telling the obvious. One of the biggest problems we have in Colwood is people have topped big trees, and now they have multiple tops, which is a failure point in a windstorm. We're talking 100, 150-foot tall trees with multiple tops, and in a windstorm, that's what's going to break, and that top is going to fly through the air and hit whatever. You shouldn't need an arborist to tell you that is a hazard. Yeah, if I've got a tree that maybe is leaning a little bit and looks relatively healthy, and staff would be very confident in saying, no, you have to get me an arborist report to say that that tree is indeed dead, diseased, dying, and beyond salvation, basically. So the idea of the committee is to make things easier for the residents. Currently, before the tree bylaw, if I wanted to chop down every single tree on my property, I could do so. And I believe personally that I should have the right to do so. It's my property, it's my tree. The city's not taking any responsibility for any liabilities that tree might present. The new bylaw hopefully will require me to come in and get a permit for it. But again, it should be my right to manage my property and my trees. I think staff is in this case going for far too great a degree of control over these items. If you look at the forest cover maps from the City of Colwood from 1986 to 2016, most of the forest cover that's been lost has been on development areas, not on private properties. And those are the issues that we should be addressing most solidly, not single trees on residential properties.
You go first.
Thank you. So I hear what Councillor Nolt's saying, and I don't disagree that I certainly do not want this to be an onerous or costly on the taxpayer or the resident. My concern with this motion is that I've just heard from staff that it's not clear enough for them or give them enough clear direction to be able to make those decisions. And I guess that's my concern. My concern is I certainly do not want to pass a bylaw that puts our staff in a position where they're making subjective decisions which they have communicated this evening that they don't necessarily feel comfortable with. So I would prefer a motion that was in place that actually accomplished what Councillor Nault has talked about, but also puts me in a situation where staff say, yeah, I feel very comfortable that I would be able to make those calls.
Your Worship, as Councillor Nault had indicated earlier, that this was considered an interim step prior to the committee finalizing their recommendations to Council and bringing a final bylaw back to Council to be amended. Yes, it's, I think, from a staff perspective, too subjective, but it is interim. What staff have heard is the committee and members of the public have said that it's too onerous for hazardous trees. We've heard that. And I think for the short term, we'll have to just work through, if it's Council's wish, we'll work through the subjectiveness and report to Council on that very issue when we come back with final amendments to the bylaw.
Okay. Just a question to and maybe Councillor Nault, because you're part of the committee. When I read in here that the city, through photograph or other documentation that the tree is hazardous, dead, whatever there, would that not include, if staff wanted an arborist report that through other documentation, could that not be done in that regard? If it wasn't clear, if the tree...
And that was the intent. If it's not entirely clear to city satisfaction that the tree is indeed dead or an obvious hazard, then an arborist report could be asked for. As the current bylaw stands, it's pretty darn difficult to do that, and I have to take out a permit, and I have to put $500 down, and I have to buy replacement trees, and. That's why we wanted to exempt hazardous trees from the bylaw in the interim.
So I'm satisfied with the intent of that. Do we need to clarify that this is residential homeowners versus like owners, and or was it meant to be anybody?
It was meant to be anybody. I mean, the tree could be hazardous to hydro lines in any part of the city.
Okay, just clarity on that one. I'm satisfied that it's something, and as was said, it's interim. Staff, I think, will work to detail it in a revised bylaw that we're expecting after the good work of our task force is completed. Anyone else? Councillor Day?
I just think council should be aware that when a resident is asked to get an arborist report, you're talking about $1,200 to $1,400 minimum to get that arborist report, plus the deposit, plus the fees, plus the trees, for something that this is a very subjective time under the bylaw. So I would support the proposed amendment going forward right now, because if nobody complains and somebody just goes out and cuts their tree, there's a good chance they're just going to get away with it. And it's the one who has the tree that's out in full view or whatever who is perhaps gets treated differently than the property that's a little less obvious. So I think it's important that we try to be reasonable as we move forward, trying to find ways to protect the trees, but not at the total expense of the homeowners.
Any comments? We have a on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Moving into our next item, 7.3.2, West Shore Parks and Recreation 2018 budget. Staff?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you have a memo regarding the proposed 2018 West Shore Parks and Rec budget. This budget projects an operating surplus, or pardon me, an operating deficit of approximately $250,000. And the proposed funding source for this operating deficit is the reserves and surplus of the society. The recommendation in the memorandum is that Council provide a one-time approval for this budget. However, I'm going to recommend tonight that Council not approve the budget. I do apologize to the public, and I do apologize to Council for the change in the recommendation at this late stage, but I don't take the recommendation lightly, and I'd like to provide the context. You may recall that in 2017, the West Shore Parks and Rec brought forward a proposed balanced budget, and the City of Langford rejected that balanced budget. This also occurred in 2018. This council has historically always supported the approval of a balanced budget at the West Shore Parks and Rec Society. In fact, this year, for the 2018 budget, Colwood approved a balanced budget, supported a balanced budget, even though it would require a 4.1% increase to the requisitions. So this is a signal that Colwood supports the continuation of the recreational services. In fact, the funding that's proposed in the draft financial plan proposes an increase to the funding level above what the West Shore Parks and Rec Society is asking for in 2018. Now, as a principle and best practice, it's not a good idea to approve a deficit budget that is funded through reserve. Reasons is that it's not sustainable. If that were to continue, the reserves would dry up and operations could not continue. And also, when and if sustainable funding levels are returned to normal, this would result in a much larger tax increase and put significant pressure on the taxpayer in that year. However, originally in the memo, I had recommended that the City of Colwood approve this year, but send a signal that in the future there would not be a future deficit budget approved. But the important reason why I'm recommending today that the budget not be approved for 2018 is that it would provide, that if the City of Colwood approved this budget this year, it would provide contractual leverage to the other owners to force future deficit budgets. There's a clause in the operating agreement with the owners that requires unanimous approval of the West Shore Parks and Rec Society budget. And if there isn't unanimous approval, then the budget defaults to the most recently approved budget. So if this year the owners approved a deficit budget, then in 2019, any one municipality can veto a balanced budget and force the members back to this budget, which would be a deficit budget. So unfortunately, approving a deficit budget in this year hamstrings owners to possibly future deficit budgets. So that will conclude my recommendation. I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Open it up to council. Any questions? Pardon?
I said I don't have any questions, that's for sure.
Councillor Day?
Thank you. Back in December, when the West Shore Parks and Rec Society first brought forward a budget with a little over a 4% lift, I felt that that was understandable, given that it had been 2 years since they'd had a lift, and I know that there are cost pressures associated with just the cost of living and increases to wages through negotiated increases. when this proposition came forward that we fund utilizing the reserves to fund this year's budget, it's tempting. It's very tempting to look at that, because we would really like to have agreement. We would really like to get along and provide all of the services that youth and families in our community rely on. But if we do that, we would in fact be doing a great disservice to all our children and families, because it's the beginning of a slow decline. So I don't support using the capital reserves for operational funding. They were built up to make that facility operate to its best and brightest capacity, to build our future Olympians, if you've been watching the Olympics. And unfortunately, when Langford did not approve the budget last year in 2017, it set in motion this series of events that lead us to where we are today. By not approving this budget, we are aware that West Shore Parks and Rec will have to revert to the last approved budget, which is what was approved in 2016. And we know that there will be a difficult balancing act that has to happen. But because the City of Langford did not approve the budget last year, we can't accept that we robbed the piggy bank this year.
Councillor Holt.
I would like to echo those sentiments. Thinking back to my first term on council, previous councils had raided the piggy bank again and again and again, using reserves to balance operating expenses, and basically spent the city next to bankrupt. My first term on council, the result of that was we had to hit a 13% tax increase in one fell swoop. Funding your operating deficit through your capital program is always a bad idea. And as was pointed out by our Director of Finance, if everybody approved this budget, then we could be in for an automatic approval of a deficit budget from now on, which would leave the West Shore Parks and Rec with basically 5 years from now absolutely no reserves, no way of repairing equipment, and then you go back to hitting the taxpayer again. So the problem with Langford rejecting the budget has steadily accumulated on us, and it's time that Langford got with the program and supported their rec center. It's their rec center as well as ours, and right now I think what they are doing is shameful, and I don't hesitate to say that. So I will not be supporting, I will be rejecting the current budget and asking the rec center to revert to its approved 2016 funding levels.
Any other members?
Thank you, through your worship. So this was a very difficult decision for me, and it is unfortunate that we have to consider a budget that is running a deficit and taking money from reserves because Langford did not approve the balanced budget. But the reason why I'm going to support the one that's proposed tonight is because I would like to see West Shore Parks and Rec continue operating uninterrupted. And I'm also hopeful that this unique circumstance will be resolved in the foreseeable future. And I think that the members are trying to work it out. And by approving the budget that's proposed tonight, it is a way of showing that hopefully we can reach a solution. Thanks.
Thank you. This has been one of the most agonizing decisions I've ever had to make on council. It's something that I don't feel good about. I don't feel comfortable with it. I don't like it. I think I'm incredibly disappointed that we're at this point. It should never have gotten to this point. And I think there's a lot of blame to go around for everybody. I've prepared some notes that I just wanted to share, and I've actually already shared this with some board members, but I wish to share it publicly as well. I've struggled with this decision to pass this budget because although it fixes a short-term problem, it creates a longer-term financial crisis. At some point, the money from reserves has to be replaced. 2 denied budgets have already underfunded the West Shore Park and Rec by 8%. Next year, a budget will have to be over 10% just in order to return to previous funded levels. I cannot see how this organization of West Shore Park and Rec can operate without a significant lift, no matter what the Hugger report says. In addition, Langford is demanding an additional $600,000 cut in funding. I see no way anyone creates the 2019 budget without severe operational cuts or dipping into reserves again. How we accomplish getting a 10% lift and make up a Langford-created $600,000 deficit is a mystery to me. That's the crux of my issue. I'm not as concerned about the 2018 budget as I am about the consequences of the 2018 budget on the 2019 budget. I'm disappointed that Colwood's view, and my view, from a board level has not been embraced. And that's clear because the other municipalities have actually already passed this budget. I think it's clear that this council major goal is the long-term survival of the organization of West Shore Park and Rec. This budget does nothing to ensure the long-term survival of this. My only moral rationale for supporting this budget is so that West Shore Park and Rec employees and West Shore Park and Rec families are not hurt short-term. Normally, I'm stuck with a decision of, do I go with my head or do I go with my heart? And I battled with that. And 9 times out of 10, I will go with my head, and I won't go with my heart. My head says that this budget should be rejected. It doesn't make any sense. It's not a good budget. My heart says I can't allow people to get hurt short-term. And saying that, I say it with a heavy heart that I will be supporting this budget this evening.
And I'll wind up by saying that deficit anythings are never very good. This council was fully behind an original 4-point plus lift in the early stages. We even were supportive of finding ways to bridge that by including a 2.5% increase at our end, just to try and make a difference to go forward. And with the information that was provided to us late today regarding the precedent setting that this would do by approving a deficit budget, we've had to revisit this, and it's been a difficult revisit for sure. So with that, I need a recommendation on the floor and a seconder.
I would move that council not approve the West Shore Parks and Recreation Society's 2018 budget.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed and opposed? In favor, 3, opposed for 2. Motion passes. Moving forward, 7.3.3, Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities Annual General Meeting Report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is just to look to council members to determine if any or perhaps up to 3 members of council are interested in attending the AVICC Annual General Meeting and Convention in April this year. It's being held in Victoria. We anticipate costs being approximately $500 per person. And in the past, council has sent up to 3 members to attend. So we're just looking for interest and to find out which members of council are interested in registering.
Mayor, can you just, sorry, I missed the dates. What was the date again?
April 13th to 15th
13 to 15.
at the Fairmont Empress.
It's downtown. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I would be interested in attending on behalf of council. Again, there are a few resolutions coming forward that the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee have keen interest in. Also, there are a number of informative sessions both on housing, on the legalization of cannabis, and the revenue sharing agreements that are going to be presented there that I feel would be of value to bring information back. So it's always hard when it's in your own town because it's early mornings and late nights and you got to do that whole transit thing. But I'd be willing to attend.
Any others?
I am not available to go, looking at the dates, but I would love to be able to give some information to Councillor Day, because one of the things that we're trying to get through ABC to take to UBCM is getting a line item for the libraries, because right now they had promised, the provincial government had promised that they were going to actually make libraries a line item and look at increase. They haven't increased the funding for libraries for 10 years. So we're looking to, I've got a lot of people sort of doing that, so if I could give that to you to get that, that would be great.
I'll put myself on notice. I usually like to go to these again, so, and then we're missing 2 members from council, so we can run it past them as well.
So does staff need, like, do we need to do funding? Is that part of the reason you're asking this? Do we need to do some, sorry,
Well,
excuse me.
They've got to make bookings for.
So we don't need to approve money, though, for you?
No.
Like you mentioned that it's $500 a piece, but we don't need to do any approval of that, do we? Like, that's already in a budget? And
The funding is...
need approval to let Cynthia go?
So the funding is in this year's preliminary budget, so to speak. But normally council passes a resolution that speaks to sending 1 person up to 3 people, that type of thing. And that's just given the approval for the attendance at the conference.
Up to 3, like we've done in the past? Yeah, that's the recommendation. Seconder?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
I wasn't going to let Cynthia.
Done. Next item, 7.3.4, a letter from Canadian Plastics Industry Association and review of November 14th resolution.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This item, normally we would have put this letter just under correspondence for Mayor and Council, but we thought it was a good introduction into speaking to Council about their November 2017 resolution regarding creation of a city bylaw for a single-use plastic bag ban. Council will probably recall that we had the Victoria checkout bag regulation bylaw as well as the CRD model bylaw for a single bag ban in front of Council, and Council directed staff to prepare a bylaw based on the CRD model and report back to Council. In this letter that we received from the Canadian Plastics Industry, they're talking about recent study that was done in Canada that they feel provides, excuse me while I just look at my notes here. Apparently there was a life cycle assessment conducted in Canada using North American data that they feel provides scientific evidence that the thin plastic bags currently used in British Columbia are the best bag environmentally, and alternative reusable bags are actually worse for the environment. One of the challenges that Victoria has is in their bylaw, they're not only issuing fines and things like that for people using bags or when they should or when they shouldn't, or did you ask before you gave them a bag. It's really quite detailed. They're also defining the types of bags. And according to this Canadian Plastics Industry Association, a lot of the bags that are being recommended as alternatives have a bigger carbon footprint than these plastic bags. So this is leading into another company, which is the Canadian where did I write this down? The Canadian Plastic Bag Association has actually filed a court challenge in front of the BC Supreme Court. They don't think that Victoria has the authority to regulate bags, or at least to the extent that they're regulating them. So what we're looking for tonight, based on the November 2017 direction to go create a bylaw, is to ask council if they want to either rescind or confirm that bylaw, and we'll continue, or if council is willing to put that direction on hold while we wait for this court challenge to play itself out, we find out the outcome, and find out what we actually can or cannot regulate in preparing our own bylaw. I did want to add, when I was talking to the manager of building inspections and bylaw services today, he mentioned it's his understanding that the City of New Westminster intends to continue with developing a plastic bag ban bylaw, even though that they know this court challenge is in place and they're just going to see what comes of it. So we're just looking for direction from council on carry on, wait until the court challenge.
Councillor Knoll?
I think I would like to wait for the court challenge to be settled. Be the prudent thing to do. I want to point out to council that the country of Burkina Faso in Africa banned plastic bags years ago for the exact reason that the Canadian plastic industry says is not true. And sorry, I don't buy their science. But I would be happy to wait and see what the court challenge says. We have had a lot of feedback from the public about the stupidity of just banning paper bags, and again, I would disagree with those people, but what I would like to see us do is to require anybody that sells or distributes any packaging is to have their own recycling facilities on site. So if you bought plastic at Kmart, doesn't exist anymore. I'm using that as a good example. So if you bought something at a store, they have to take their packaging back. London Drugs does that now. They also take back light bulbs and batteries and anybody else's styrofoam you want to take in. I think that's a fabulous corporate responsibility. But if we required everybody to do that, eventually the pressure would get on the manufacturers of overpackaged garbage. I just bought a windshield wiper. It was wrapped in one of those big clear plastic things with cardboard around it, and then inside the windshield wiper there was another plastic sleeve. Total waste of plastic, waste of energy, and there's no incentive for anybody to change that. I would like to see if we could get council to instruct staff to prepare a bylaw that would require people to have recycling facilities available on their site for everything they sell.
Councillor Martin?
Thank you. Well, I'm not going that far. I agree that we should wait until the court case is done. I think that's the most prudent thing. The one funny thing that I found about this was that the Canadian Plastics Association couldn't find a research that was actually done in English. Like there isn't a single English report that supports their opinion that they had to find something in French and that we have to wait for it to get translated. Well, that's interesting. So yeah, no, I think we wait until the court and then see what happens after the court, and then I think we can make an educated decision what we can do once we understand what the court case has said.
Councillor Day first, and then we'll go to process here.
Thanks. I concur with the idea of waiting till the courts have said what rules we have, and at that point in time, we may actually be wanting to bring forward a resolution to AVICC and UBCM because I do think this is a bigger item. You know, we're all getting inundated with these overly packaged items, and you know, used to be taking the garbage out was a chore. Taking out the recycling is not as heavy, but twice as large. It's still twice as many trips. So, and I want to commend London Drugs. I have used their program. They're phenomenal. I save up my batteries. I mean, I didn't buy them all at London Drugs. They're just a great corporate citizen to do that. And by praising the people who are doing the right thing and, you know, making that extra effort to go and use those retailers who are doing the right thing, I think that's another way to try to affect more change. There's an awful lot of packaging that isn't making its way into the recycling facilities, and that isn't being utilized as well as it could be. So I think that it is a bigger problem, so we need to think about that. I think it's great that we'll know what our role is and be able to fulfill it, and then look to other agencies higher up than us to carry on the mandate.
So a matter of process, we need to rescind.
Through you, Madam Mayor. What council could do tonight is just
Or
pass
just-
a resolution that we just put it on hold,
Put it
and
on-
we'll report back to council after we hear the outcome of the court challenge.
That's why I wanted the process here. So
So I'll move option C from the report, the memo to council, that we put the preparation of the single-use plastic bag ban bylaw on hold until the Canadian Plastic Bag Association BC's Supreme Court challenge of Victoria's checkout bag regulation bylaw is known, and report back to council.
Seconder, please. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Pardon? Okay. Bylaw number, we're into bylaws, folks. Section 8, bylaw number 1687, final reading. It's in regards to the closure of the portion of Seafield Road between Heather Bell and Selleck Way. Staff?
Just to introduce bylaw 1687 for final reading. This is a bylaw that council has considered first 3 readings for. It was scheduled for council to give it final reading and adoption on January 8th. However, it was removed from the agenda due to the timing goals of the concurrent land use amendment that is also going for final reading tonight. Different than land use amendments, road closure amendments go for readings 1, 2, and 3 out to the public, and then 4th. So this is the option for me to bring forward in memo format what the public has said. We did get a fair bit of feedback. The public did submit a petition, which is summarized in your memo, including the wording of that petition, for a total of 86 responses that were included in that petition. The developer held his own public meeting. I didn't attend, but I understand it was well attended, and provided such clarity to the community that several of the people that had signed the petition actually withdrew their names from it. The developer has agreed to meet some of the conditions of the residential community, which was to leave the existing road open until such a time as the new one was operational and in use. And before staff can proceed with the closure, bylaw 1687 must be adopted. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
So I do not have a question. More of, I'll phrase it in the question so that you can talk. I did attend that meeting just as a citizen, and then I've also attended another meeting where the developer was there, and both times the developer clearly stated that the closing of the old road and the opening of the new road will not exceed 3 hours. Yeah, he said that twice. So I would like it just to be on public record that I have heard that, and I have an expectation that that would be lived up to, that as we transition from the old road to the new road, and that we do not experiencing anything larger than that. I'm skeptical that he could actually make that happen, but that's what he has communicated. So I guess I will look to you, Brent, and ask, is that even realistic?
I have had frank discussions with the developer about that goal. And although there's a small amount of curbing that needs to transition over, it is highly possible. Maybe not on a completely asphalted surface or fully curbed surface, but in a temporary fashion by all means. And it would just be a matter of scheduling certain works to be outside of the traditional workday, perhaps. Not so it would conflict with the noise bylaw and regulations, but it would just be some very, very serious timing. The developer he's committed to me that he doesn't see a need to close it at all, almost. And I think that's fantastic. We'll certainly work with him as best as possible to work with him. If there's any sort of noise parameter that works outside of the traditional hours of the noise bylaw, we'd certainly bring forward that to council. But the intention is exactly as he's explained it to you. I think it's possible. I think that some surface works would need to be done, but it would certainly be passable by all vehicles, emergency vehicles, and then we just have to offset the paving goals.
Just as a quick final follow-up, can you tell me, do we anticipate that Seafield will keep its same name? Like, will it still be Seafield, or when the new road opens, will that be a different name?
We anticipate the same name to carry forward. That will allow all the existing residents on Seafield to not go through any sort of angst with road naming changes, and the new alignment will be contiguous, and so there's no, although with the chicane, so there's no reason to alter the name.
One thing I think the residents of the area were quite loud and clear about was the necessity for Ocean Grove to have a different access to their property. I wholeheartedly agree. Once the Seafield is built out, we don't want to see all of the construction traffic from Ocean Grove, which could potentially go on for years, accessing it through Seafield. So I think when we get around to the whatever new development proposal comes through for Ocean Grove, that the city should require they open their exit on Heatherbell Road. And I don't know if I get that, not germane to the current bylaw, but I would strongly support exactly that. And I think the residents are quite right that if you've got a nice new house on Seafield and you've got gravel trucks bumping through there for the next 5 years, it's not going to be very pleasant.
Thank you. I guess in reading this and thinking back over the number of road closures that have been done within the City of Colwood, the land is becoming obviously more and more valuable. And so every little piece, whether we were talking about the end of Glencairn Lane, when it was closed and assimilated into the development project next door, you know, it was worth a certain amount then. It'd be worth an awful lot more now, just given the rising market. And I'm just concerned when we've actually done the road closure and yet traffic is still proceeding through that area. I guess, not that I want to doubt that things will go as promised, but what tools do we have at our disposal if things don't go according to plan?
Excuse me while I pause for a minute there. You know, the intention of the closure post tonight is to get to obtain a resolution to close if that's what council's wish is. It is not to deposit the plan of closure. This is another sequence of events that the developer and I have spoken about, and it's certainly reasonable, and I bring it forward now so that you're aware of it. Due to the cost of legal surveying and submitting plans to land titles and the sequential necessary operation of those depositive plans, close, open, register lots, not register lots, the actual activity on the ground in terms of the closure beyond a resolution won't be changed until such a time as that plan is deposited at land titles and the subsequent plan is filed on top of it. That will make sure that Colwood is never short the municipal asset of a road without a road of equal or greater value. And that's the premise of the exchange agreement. In terms of the promise of opening the road and meeting the promises and obligations that the developers expressed to the public, I don't wish to express that those promises are the promises of staff. Those are the promises of the developer in meeting the concerns and trying to address the concerns of the community. Staff is aware of them and have heard them, as well as the public voice that's been spoken and recorded this evening. So we will hold the developers' feet to the fire for those as best as possible for the sequential timing of the events physically on the ground, which is what the public will see. The paper trail is happening behind that, is not a visible trail. We will be actively there. We'll be actively coordinating, communicating with the developer. We'll be actively working with them on not only their signage. He's advised myself that he'll place notification signs, contact signs, in case of emergency signs, all directed to him as opposed to staff, so that way he can address them as well. But the community is aware of the staff members that are involved in this process, and they will reach out, I believe, to not only comment about something that hasn't gone right, but they'll demand it. Because of that, it's our intention to be in front of any of those concerns, and have a strong staff present there, not concurrent with the developer, but frankly watching the developer to ensure that the promises that have been made to the public are as best adhered to. In terms of a negative consequence, there is no bylaw in essence other than the emergency services bylaw that will be compromised. And the emergency services bylaw deals with that continuity of safe passage. It will always be insured from either result, and the fire department, if necessary, will have to be staged there if we see a closure happening of any extended period of time. In terms of what would be considered an extended period of time, I would say anything greater than an hour or two would need to necessitate a fire trucks there, and we've done that on other developments in my short time at the Colwood, where they've parked a fire vehicle there, they've brought a water truck, and they've made sure that all the concerns are met. I recognize that that's not a wholehearted commitment, but it is how staff can work to obtain the goals as expressed through council and as expressed by the developer.
Thank you. I guess I also want to be clear. I don't want to be punitive when I was talking about that 3-hour window. I don't care if it's 3 hours and 15 minutes or something along that line. I think the community is more concerned that the road gets shut down for an extended period of time, like a day or 2 days. And so, if it's 3 or 4 hours, I don't really care. But I guess I'm more concerned that we just don't see a road be shut down for an extended period of time where people don't have any access.
Anybody else? Somebody to move final? Second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Bylaw number 1681 for final reading. Colwood Land Use Bylaw number 151, 1989. Amendment number 161 Amendment number 161 Seafield Road. Go ahead for final. We need land use bylaw.
Through your worship, I'll defer to the Director of Planning, if I may.
Straightforward.
Your worship, there is no staff report with this. It's just simply the bylaw for fourth reading.
Move final.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Hate it when my thing jumps up here.
8.3.
I know, but yeah. 8.3, bylaw number 1718, final reading, Colwood Main Sewer Local Area Service Bylaw Establishment, number 598, 2001, amendment number 66 for 517 Mount View Avenue.
Move final.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Motion to go back in camera.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, folks.